You hear the name Nostradamus, and you immediately think of one thing: seeing the future. For centuries, he's been the guy. But was he a true prophet? Or was he a master of something else entirely? In this explainer, we're going to open up the playbook behind the prophecies. His whole legend was built on prophecies just like this one, which he wrote way back in 1555. I mean, it reads like a riddle, right? A young lion beats an old one, pierces his eye through a golden cage, and it all ends in a cruel death. On its own, it's just some pretty cryptic poetry. But what happened next? Well, that's what made Nostradamus a star. Just 4 years later, this prophecy appeared to come true in absolutely horrifying detail. King Henry II, he's the older lion, was in a jousting tournament with the much younger Count of Montgomery. A splinter from Montgomery's lance shattered the king's golden helmet, the golden cage, and pierced his eye. He died 10 agonizing days later. I mean, the prediction was so specific, it seemed impossible for it to just be a coincidence. That one prediction pretty much cemented his legend forever. But it brings up the big question: was Nostradamus genuinely seeing the future? Or had he figured out a brilliant formula for making prophecies that could just never be proven wrong? To get to the bottom of that, we have to look past the myth. Because Michel de Nostredame wasn't some kind of magician living in a tower. He was a doctor, and he was living through a time of immense chaos and death. His life was basically defined by turmoil. Just look at this timeline. The bubonic plague forces his university to close down. Then later, it comes back and claims his wife and children. He spent years on the road as a traveling apothecary, treating the sick on the front lines. So this wasn't some mystic, detached from the world. This was a man who knew tragedy and the randomness of death firsthand. And here is where you really start to see his rebellious side. When he finally gets a chance to enroll for his medical doctorate, he's kicked out almost immediately. And his crime? Well, he had practical experience as an apothecary, a hands-on trade that the academic elites of the day completely looked down on. This put him in direct conflict with the establishment right from the start. But here's the thing: that practical experience saved lives. While all the establishment doctors were bleeding their patients, Nostradamus was focused on things that, actually worked: hygiene, clean water, low-fat diets, and even herbal remedies that were packed with vitamin C. He was literally centuries ahead of his time, practicing what we would now call preventative medicine. So what we have here is an intelligent, observant man who wasn't afraid to challenge convention. And that same mindset is the absolute key to understanding his prophecies. It wasn't about magic, it was about a masterful and very deliberate use of language. The real secret to his prophecies is that he wrote them to be misunderstood. He intentionally created this linguistic fog by mixing languages, using anagrams, and deploying all this dense symbolism. This wasn't just bad writing, it was a survival strategy. It made his predictions endlessly interpretable, and more importantly, it protected him from getting charged with heresy. Let's look at a classic example. This quatrain right here is one of the most cited predictions of the 20th century. The battlefield will be against Hister. I mean, it seems obvious, doesn't it? Hister. He's clearly talking about Adolf Hitler. But hold on. A classically educated man like Nostradamus would have known something that we've mostly forgotten. Hister was the ancient Latin name for the Danube River. And this, right here, this is the core of his method. He uses a real, historical term that just happens to sound a whole lot like a future name, creating the perfect hook for later generations to grab onto. So where did he get all these ideas for so much doom and gloom? Well, he wasn't just staring into a bowl of water. It turns out a major source was a book of older Christian prophecies called the Mirabilis Liber. He was essentially remixing timeless fears of war and disaster and then repackaging them in his own unique cryptic style. Okay, so if the prophecies are vague and maybe even recycled, why are we still talking about them 500 years later? The answer isn't about Nostradamus anymore. It's about us. It's about the predictable ways our brains are wired. It all starts with this incredibly powerful cognitive bias. You know the saying, hindsight is 20/20, right? Well, after an event happens, like the death of King Henry II, we look back at some vague verse, and suddenly the connections seem totally obvious. We subconsciously fit the ambiguous text to the concrete reality, and it feels like a perfect match. And other biases do the rest of the heavy lifting. The Barnum effect. That's what makes us accept vague statements as if they're specific to us. Apophenia is our brain's tendency to see patterns in random noise, to connect unrelated lines and form a coherent story. And the big one, confirmation bias.
That's what makes us celebrate the one quatrain that seems to predict 9/11, while we conveniently ignore the 941 others that make absolutely no sense at all.
And speaking of that famous 9/11 prophecy, it mentions a great new city at 45 degrees latitude, which so many people take to mean New York. The only problem? New York City is at 40 degrees north. It's a factual error we're willing to just overlook because we're so determined to make the prediction fit the event. So what's the ultimate legacy of Nostradamus? It's not as a man who could see the future, but as a man who created a perfect mirror for human anxiety. And nothing illustrates this better than World War II. Get this, both the Nazis and the Allies weaponized his prophecies. They would literally drop leaflets with competing quatrains that predicted their own victory. The verses were so flexible, they could be used to support any outcome you want.
Ironically, his one truly specific and accurate prediction had nothing to do with magic. He was suffering from severe gout. He was a doctor, and he knew his body was failing. He told his secretary he wouldn't survive the night. And he was right. It was a medical diagnosis, not a vision.
And that brings us to the real takeaway. The genius of Nostradamus was not supernatural. It was a deep, profound understanding of humanity. He knew we would always fear war, famine, and disaster. He knew we would always try to find patterns in the chaos. He wasn't writing for a specific future. He was writing for all possible futures.
In the end, his prophecies are like a Rorschach test for every generation. We're the ones who pour our own fears of climate change, political instability, technological disruption into his 500-year-old verses. So the question isn't what Nostradamus saw for our future. The real question is, what do we see when we look into his mirror? What fears does it reflect for us right now?